Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Rachel Wilkinson. I'm from the International Civil Society Centre, and I am the moderator for today's digital dialogue. For the benefit of participants who are blind or who have a visual impairment, all speakers will begin with a short self-description. So I'll start. Hello, I'm Rachel. I have shoulder-length dark hair with what I will describe as having very prominent silver streaks in it. And today I'm wearing a maroon-coloured top. We are delighted to host our monthly digital dialogue today as part of the International Civil Society's annual gathering, Global Perspectives. We have a very special panel discussion to discuss the impact AI is having now on mis and information and all of those online landscapes, and what implications this may hold for us now and for the future. Part of my role at the International Civil Society Centre is about leading our future thinking work, where we, together with other civil society organisations, use strategic foresight to aid and equip us to be more agile and adapt in a rapidly changing world, and to help us achieve greater impact. And for more information, and this is a shameless plug, you're very welcome to check out our work at Civil Society Organisation and look under our Futures and Innovation work. Some of you may have already taken part in our previous session of Global Perspectives that was focusing on future scenarios in civic space and may already have had a little taster of what our work's about. But we have seen this year lots of signals and emerging trends around AI, particularly in its regard and use with online information landscapes. And with this in mind, we've brought together this panel today. With the rapid growth of generative AI and the ability to create content that looks hyper-realistic has increased manifold. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, the company who developed ChatGPT, has said, and I quote, "I'm particularly worried that these models could be used for large-scale disinformation. The immense challenge that AI brings to online information landscapes is not in question, and the present and future threats AI means for mis and disinformation cannot be denied. There is, however, also a potential to use these emerging technologies to look for solutions of how to counter mis and disinformation, as well as the chance for us as civil society organisations and as civil society to ask, what can we do? How can we assess what should we be doing as civil society on this issue?" In this special digital dialogue panel, we will catch up on the latest developments on AI relating to mis and disinformation, discuss what trends and signals we are seeing emerge, and question what does this mean in a post-truth context. To help us discuss these questions and more, I'm extremely delighted to welcome three wonderful panelists. We have Elizabeth Orembo, who is a research fellow at ICT in Africa. She's a tech policy enthusiast who works at the intersection of technology and human development. Liz has a vast experience in internet governance and stakeholder engagement in Africa. Henry Parker, Global Government Affairs at Logically AI, which is a UK tech scale-up that combines advanced AI with one of the world's largest commercial fact-checking and open source intelligent teams. They work with government, businesses, and social media platforms to identify harmful mis and disinformation online. And lastly, we have Mare, who is Associate Professor and Head of Department of Communications and Media Studies at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. His many research interests include analysing the intersection between technology and society, digital journalism, media and democracy, political communication, digital disinformation campaigns, and many, many more. Each panelist will be sharing their key points as an introduction for around 5 minutes, and then we'll have some discussion and questions. At any point during the presentation, please do put your questions into the chat. We really do want to hear from you, audience. We won't get to all of them, sadly, but we will certainly do our best. Liz, can I invite you to please turn on your camera and join me here? Liz is joining us from Nairobi in Kenya. Would you please share your key points and please start with a brief self-description?
Thank you, Rachel. So my name is Liz Orembo, as I've been introduced, and I am a research fellow at the Research ICT Africa, and I work on particularly AI, information disorders, and platform governance. Research ICT Africa has existed for over a decade to fill a strategic gap in information society, the development of information society and digital economy. So when it comes to AI development in Africa, first of all, I'd like to say that my presentation is going to be biased towards Africa because much of my research is in that region. And what I can say is that AI has developed so much. We are coming from a point where we could start seeing some of the communication and images and start understanding them as whether they are real or not. And right now, as emerging technologies develop, we are starting to see the difficulty in determining whether information is real or not. And big institutions are being affected. Electoral bodies are being affected. Journalists who are supposed to be the most critical among citizens are even falling prey into the intentions of disinformation powered AI. And when it comes to Africa, much of the researchers have started by saying that AI development in Africa is still low. And there might be that perception that you're not affected by disinformation. But disinformation is something that started even before the internet, and it's getting onto the internet. And with more technologies, more patterns of disinformation, newer patterns, sophisticated patterns of disinformation are at play. So that's not to say that Africa is not being impacted by disinformation itself. It's being impacted just as the rest of the world is being impacted. But also, my main point would be on the importation of disinformation as a service, and also Africa being at a geostrategic position for some of these strategic interests. We've started seeing foreign players like Russia deploying their digital assets in the African information sphere. And some of them have come at during conflicts and conflicts that have even led to coup. Some of them even going as far as interrupting election. Also bodies their reputation. So in itself, when it comes to foreign interference. The other part of foreign interference is the interest by African politicians to buy or to outsource some of these services from foreign companies. Some of them from Israel. I'm sorry, Israel is so much in global news right now. But these technologies have been sorted from some of these foreign companies to use some of their assets to change narratives or to fight for the change of narratives in African societies. We are talking about accounts bought from deep web by these companies, or some of them being nurtured over a period of time, so that when they are deployed in an information sphere, then they look genuine and they have a lot of interest to infiltrate into African information sphere. And they've ended up actually influencing elections. We're also talking about disinformation at a micro-targeted level in a way that much of the disinformation, the effects of disinformation that are being realized are of events that happened 3 to 5 years ago. After the events have already happened, the impact have already been felt. The people who've deployed those technologies have already gotten their results. So the challenge here, especially for civil society, is to monitor the use and the deployment of AI in a way that they can't realize the harms in real time. But the challenge in such kind of monitoring would require a lot of resources and expertise, which is also not in the region. We are talking about civil society structure in Africa, where we have very many small civil society organizations. The share of grants is not that as innovative granting and innovative implementation of granting in a way that they can actually design solutions innovatively, because we have emerging technologies developing rapidly, and with this special or unique situations in Africa, even that granting allowing them to play around with innovation and in solving these situations. So yeah, we are talking about AI, monitoring AI that is not just going to require much transparency from the tech companies, but also being able to evaluate this system in their multiple elements, because AI is not just one system. It could be a combination of systems. And much of the research right now, as we research into the effects of AI and disinformation, we are only looking at the impact of the society, not looking at what different elements of AI is causing this harm. So that's going to require more than transparency. It's going to require capacity, and it's going to require a lot of funding as well. I think the other one is Africa also being at a point where much of the technology being used in the continent is from Western countries. That presents two problems in the regulation and even advocacy into the AI, because reaching to redress is difficult. And then the other one is how AI is being modeled is not being modeled from an African value, but another society's value. So even using them as solution is also a challenge. The other day I was reading reports by journalists who are expressing that even seeking opinions about some certain moral issue is difficult, because the tools would either decline in giving an answer, or they would give an answer biased in a particular way. So even using that tool for analysis, or even as a source, is even difficult. And so they've had to go back to the old ways of journalism. It means technology is not really helping them because they have to get their sources and to do analysis of their work using the old ways without technology. I'll stop there. In case there are any questions, you can shoot.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Liz. I would ask you now to turn off your video, and I would now invite Henry. Welcome, Henry. Please start your 5-minute presentation with a brief description. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name's Henry, and today I've got a green jumper on. I've combed my hair, so that's a rarity, but it's short and brown, and I'm really pleased to be here today. So Logically is a British-based tech company. We tackle online mis and disinformation, and we work with governments all around the world, including the US, UK, New Zealand, and in the global south as well. We are seeing quite a lot of interest in what we do in Africa now too. And basically, we help them to manage misinformation threats. We also work with social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to help them verify viral narratives and whether they are true or not through our fact-checking unit, Logically Facts. You can Google the work we do. We publish everything we do. The first point to be clear on is that mis and disinformation are not new. They've been around for thousands of years. It's not AI that's created this. The second thing to say is that we often get confused by what we mean, so let's be clear. Misinformation is simply information that's patently false. The person promoting it may actually believe it, but it's false. Disinformation is different. This is the information that is both patently false, but also intentionally spread by someone or something with a motive in mind. So we need to be really clear about what we're talking about in assessing the problem. What is new about this? So disinformation isn't new. What is new is actually social media, because it's really with the availability of technology and the ubiquity of access to content that sits on those platforms that we've really started to see both misinformation and disinformation take root on a mass scale in a targeted way all around the world. And the services that we provide to governments and social media platforms are designed to tackle both of these phenomena. But they are quite different in terms of how they manifest themselves. Now, we've seen for some time, and we've only been around since 2017, so I guess that's sort of some time. But even over that time, the way in which social media has acted for a vehicle for mis and disinformation has remained fairly static, as has the tools for tackling it, and the approaches for doing that. So we work both on technology, but we also deliver media literacy training, particularly in India. We process fact checks, as I said, on the most egregious viral misinformation, and these are a vital tool. But we haven't and really used AI to say what's credible and what isn't. Neither have we seen AI used to generate mis and disinformation until very recently. And that is what is now happening. Generative AI will have a very wide range of positive and societal economic impacts. But the widespread availability of it now means that anyone with an internet connection can make disinformation a lot more easily, and that will create risks. And we think you can classify those risks into three key buckets. Firstly, I think, and this was touched on previously, these tools do herald the effective democratization of large-scale disinformation operations. So the cost of designing and launching one will be brought down considerably. So to give you some idea of some numbers, you look at, say, as an example, what Russia spent to interfere with the US presidential election in 2016. They spent $12 million doing that. They had about 400 people working on that. And there are now proofs of concepts, which people have shown work, where you can't just make deepfakes, you can distribute them and actually run a live disinformation operation for as little as maybe $400 and 2 or 3 people. That has been proven to have been done. So we are now facing a huge reduction in the barriers to entry of the type of wide-scale influence operation, manipulation of public opinion that is possible to deliver. It can be done by far more people in a much more cheaper way. Now, the second key phenomenon we see is that the content itself will simply be more scalable and more persuasive. So AI models can write from various perspectives, from different personas, and most of our research shows that humans can't tell the difference between synthetic and human origin. And that's with the people with the highest media literacy and the highest levels of education. It is becoming more convincing. In fact, we've tested this, and we found that you can use these tools quite easily to generate deepfakes. In 85% of cases, there's no content moderation around how those tools are created. They're not actually that high quality, but to go back to my previous point, it's something that really you can deliver in a much more wide scale and widespread way than was previously possible. I think the third thing I would highlight is the ability to use this to target the disinformation in a lot more specific way. So you can use this not just to create fake images, but to actually understand who the audience of those fake images are in a much more detailed and explicit way. You can tailor it to what audiences want to hear. So you can farm details of what they might put on their Facebook platforms and then engineer the content and the way it's distributed in a way that makes them more susceptible to it. That is something that we are starting to see. Alternatively, you can just, as I said before, you can flood the zone. You can put so much content which is fake out there in such high volumes that you just create an overarching sense of mistrust, which begins to manifest itself into society as a whole. So to finish, what do we do about all this? I mean, a lot of focus has been placed on things like watermarking images, so making it clear if AI has made them or not, and this has promise. But there is no currently reliable way of detecting whether a single sample of text is being made by an AI tool or not. So there's no great deep fake or AI fake news detector out there right now. It doesn't exist in any reliable sense. What we're trying to do is work around that problem. We actually think that the best way to address this risk is to actually use AI to identify the tactics that actors use to get content in front of audiences via social media networks. And we're developing and we're successfully using AI that can do that. It's not a magic wand. I mean, we need humans to do this. Believe it or not, some of the same tactics that Taylor Swift fans use to promote their fandom is used by hostile states to promote their content too. And you need people that can tell the difference, believe me. But it's not entirely end-to-end. What I would say to end with is that within risk lies opportunity. And that is one of the many ways, is one of the great paradoxes of AI. At what point do we start thinking of it as a complete threat? And it is a threat in the context of disinformation. And at what point do we start to think about as something, it being a safety tool that you can use to safeguard against that threat that AI itself has created? I know that sounds like a paradox, and that's because it is. But we genuinely think the way forward here is not to try and work out whether everything is fake or not. It's a possible task. It's to work out how you can control the harm that this is undoubtedly creating. And I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Henry. If I could ask you to please turn off your camera, and I'll invite Admire to turn on your camera, please. And you have 5 minutes to do your introductions. And thank you for starting with a brief description.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Admire Mare. I'm an associate professor at the University of Johannesburg and also head of department there. Thank you so much. I'll briefly talk about disinformation campaigns in Africa. And then towards the end, I will just reflect on what we are currently doing in terms of the research that we are doing around trying to map the impact of AI, especially around misinformation in our ecosystem. I think I just want to start from where my other fellow panelists have just left, and to just say that we are in a space where AI is pretty much dominating the international headlines. And because of that, we are seeing a lot of moral panic around it. We are seeing a lot of hysteria, hope, threats that are associated with it. So to the point that at some point you are so clouded with all these kinds of narratives around what AI is likely to do and what it is capable of doing. So in that cloud of information that we are seeing coming to the sender, one thing that we often don't take seriously is to say that every technology that we have ever had as humanity always brings with it opportunities, but also it also brings with it challenges. And I think AI is no different in this regard. It is just one of the tools that we have at our disposal right now. And certainly there are certain opportunities that comes with it. One opportunity that I can just flag is to say that even right now in the context of misinformation, AI can actually we can actually use AI to try and identify misinformation in our ecosystem. So that is the positive use of AI in that information disorder that we find ourselves in. But over and above that, we are also seeing the negative use, or what I would probably say the dark uses of AI, where people are increasingly also using the same kind of tool to do deep fakes that Henry was talking about, but also to micro-target, the audience that they want to influence, the people that they want to persuade with these kinds of narratives. So there's a lot of things that are happening in that kind of space. And I want to talk about it within the context of Africa, because that's where I'm very familiar with and where I do most of my research. Just to say, as what Liz was just talking about, we've also begun to see in the last couple of years, the heavy influence, especially of China, Russia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia to some extent, in our information ecosystem as a continent. And these countries are coming in, obviously, because Africa is a geopolitical theater for so many things: economic interest, political interest, but also cultural interest that these various countries have, when it comes to Africa. And for example, is what Liz was talking about. We've seen the use of AI in pushing misinformation narratives, especially in the ongoing war, especially in Sudan. We have also seen what has been happening in places like, for example, Chad, Niger, Again, you are increasingly seeing a lot of these well-coordinated AI-generated misinformation campaigns that are actually being targeted in those particular spaces. And again, what is very interesting about the resurgence of these two countries, especially China and Russia, in our ecosystem, is that they are presenting themselves to most African countries as your all-weather friend. Your all-weather friends. We were there with you during the liberation struggle. We were with you when no one was coming to your aid. So we are back, and let's continue with our relationship. So they are presenting themselves as friends. So in order to push that kind of narrative, they are also discrediting democracy, especially liberal democracy, as a failed project that has outlived its usefulness. And again, that's why you are increasingly seeing in most countries they are pushing this narrative that coups, strong men leadership is what Africa needs to move on to the next level. And I think that is something that we really need to look at going into the future, because if you see what has been happening, especially in the Sahel, the so-called Sahel coup belt, where there's been a lot of coups that have happened in the last couple of months and years, again you can begin to see the hand of some of these giant superpowers that are also having a hand in this particular ecosystem. So what becomes very important going into the future for me is to say we really need to begin to see how AI is actually being used to actually pollute especially our social media ecosystem, especially in Africa. And I think one can actually then say maybe the impact will not be as dire, as bad as it is probably in other countries where people actually have got a lot of access to the internet. In Africa, at least 51% of our population have access to some kind of internet. Of course, that internet is not always broadband internet. Sometimes it's social media internet. It's internet through access to WhatsApp, access to Twitter. So it's in a way, it's a limited kind of internet. It's not the full bouquet of the internet. And because of that, one can actually then say, if people are actually getting a lot of their content using WhatsApp, it means that they are not likely to be pre-exposed, be exposed to this kind of misinformation campaigns, especially that are very targeted, that we tend to see on Twitter or X or Facebook, Instagram, and other platforms like even TikTok to some extent. So one can actually begin to say maybe Africa will not really bear the brunt of it now because of that kind of digital and ecosystem and digital infrastructure that it has at the moment. But one thing also that we need to be wary about that kind of a conclusion is to say that most of the things that actually happen on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, they tend to be downloaded by other people that have access, then pushed out to other people that don't really have access through maybe sharing your phone with your mother, sharing your phone with your sister. And because of that, it does have a ripple effect, because in as much as it was probably targeted at one person, because of the sharing culture that is so deeply ingrained amongst Africans, it's easy that that kind of information gets shared amongst many people because of that multiple use of one phone, multiple use of one account within a family, within a community, and that can create a situation where, in as much as AI generated deepfakes that are micro-targeted at people may not actually be able to affect a lot of people at one go, but because of the ripple effect of the sharing culture that I talked about, we are likely to see a lot happening in that kind of space going into the future. So from where I'm sitting, I'm sitting in a situation where we really need to understand the impact of AI on misinformation from a broader communicative ecosystem or ecology that Africa has, because it's so diverse. Most people actually get their information offline through word of mouth, through street corner talks and things like that. So within that context of the sharing culture, we are likely to see a lot of people being exposed to these kinds of misinformation campaigns just because of the nature in which we are so interdependent in terms of the sharing culture. So what are we currently doing in terms of dealing with some of these issues? I just want to say one or two things before I probably park. Just to say that currently, of course, certainly there's a lot of things that we're doing in terms of trying to do research around mapping, the actors, what are their interests? So, for example, if it's China and Russia, if they are using AI for misinformation, and what are they trying to do? What are their interests? What are they trying to achieve? Which kinds of tactics are they using to try and infiltrate and influence various actors and stakeholders in this particular ecosystem? So that's essentially where we are right now in terms of doing research. But also, we are also trying to make sure that we also see the other positive side, where AI is also helping fact checkers, for example, to try and flag some of these problematic pieces of information and claims that actually go viral in our social media spaces. So it's also very important to see where areas where AI is actually being used positively to try and bring tangible but also very healthy and resilient information ecosystems in our community. So that's also something that I'm currently doing, just to map what is actually happening and how different fact-checking organizations in Africa actually currently are trying to use AI for combating actually misinformation rather than actually fueling misinformation, as we are seeing from other malign actors that I've already talked about. I think let me stop there so that we can allow others also to field their questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mare. I now invite all the speakers to turn back their cameras and to unmute themselves. And we will move into our next section, where the speakers get the chance and the opportunity to ask each other questions based on their opening inputs or on their fields of work and expertise. Who would like to start?
I want to ask a question to Henry. I think he raised the very important issues in terms of, the way in which AI is already, creating a lot of problems in terms of pushing out misinformation, especially the micro-targeting side of things. I just wanted to get a sense, because he's also involved in a lot of research. I just wanted to get a sense of, are they doing any research in Africa at the moment, and what is it that they have seen in terms of AI and misinformation from their end?
We do plenty. So about 25% of our research work and our investigations are done in the public interest. You can go on our website and find them. I've actually posted some work we've done, particularly on the Sahel and the coups around that in the chat. I would say that what we're seeing at the moment is very early stage use of generative AI in the mis and disinformation landscape. I certainly think we're seeing content that's generated by AI starting to circulate. There is less of the micro-targeting scenario that you've just talked about going on. It's certainly a theoretical possibility, but I know I'm going to sound like a slightly sort of tired old disinformation warrior here. We don't think we're seeing a lot of disinformation happening, but it's still done in the old-fashioned way, with humans sitting there creating fake content and distributing it in the same way that it's always been distributed. We're only really at the cusp of this. I think what will change is as the tools themselves, the generative AI tools, become more established. And that is starting to happen. So this year really is when we've seen the tools that generate images through AI become widely available. It's really only this year that you've started to see large language models that sound like humans when they write become widely available. And I think it's that sort of Rubicon that we've now started to cross that we'll start to see this technology really be used, which is why I said at the top of my sort of 3 key risks. It's the barriers to entry. And as those come down, the level of risk of this technology being used in this context goes up. And we're in the middle of that process happening right now.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
I feel very honoured and very pleased that we have 2 experts from Africa today. From my point of view, sitting in Berlin, we hear so much about the mis and disinformation landscape, focused a lot on Europe. And so it was very fascinating, Liz, when you made the point about a lot of outside interference. Obviously, Russia often mentioned when we talk about disinformation these days. And so I have a question for you, Liz. And specifically in Africa, you mentioned there's a lot of tactics and methods being used from foreign actors. I wondered whether you had any experience or any research around, is there any difference between the tactics and the methods that you're seeing employed by external disinformation bad actors compared to maybe local disinformation attacks and more localized campaigns that are happening? I'd be really interested to hear if you thought it was a different context.
I think the tactics that are being used is the same, but how they're applied is different. The narrative is different to suit a certain demographic population. I'm going to give an example of Cambridge Analytica, where the same type of micro-targeting was being used in other countries, in US, in even Britain, with the Brexit. But when it came to Kenya and Nigeria, it took an ethnic lens where people were micro-targeted using lines of ethnicity. And so because with the ethnic communities also being in different geographies, we also see patterns in Facebook where there are also patterns of formation of groups or formation of communities even within social media networks. So it was easy to target these communities and give them different kind of messaging. And so with this micro-targeting, it's like I said, it's very difficult to even see the effects of this micro-targeting, even the presence of that micro-targeting, because it's not happening countrywide, it's happening within a geographical, within a certain geographical area. And the impact of it is massive, as some of the intention is not to vote, some of the intention is to vote with another kind of manipulative information. So I would say that the tactics are the same, but the messaging is so different and it's very, very targeted as well. And the influence is also different depending on how communities use technology itself. Like Admire said, there's a lot of sharing within the African networks. But also the other thing that is going to determine how people are impacted with disinformation is the level of digital literacy and also general literacy as well. It's actually affecting how people are being impacted. And also the design in how this disinformation is also being distributed, also to cater to that as well. Because there are platforms where, like Twitter, African Twitter is much of an elite, while Facebook is not. And then distribution goes to WhatsApp. There are WhatsApp groups that can decipher some of this message, higher levels of media literacy. There are some groups where the level of media literacy is very low. And so with the patterns of dissemination, it goes from an elite group going down, like Henry said, that there are people who know that information is false, but they will share it anyway because of the leaning into their political narrative. And so it goes even downwards, even to people who won't even know that that kind of misinformation is true or false. And this is the large part of the population that lives in the rural area, lower levels of media literacy, but it's very big to determine an action or the direction of an election or the direction of a conflict. So disinformation is not being spread among the elitist group to influence that part of the population, but to spread it further down so that the influence is much bigger when it comes to the targeted part of the population.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Liz. And Admire, I know that we had a pre-briefing call and you were talking as well about marginalized groups being much more affected. And during that conversation, you spoke about what civil society could do and the impact it's having on civil society. So I wonder if you could embellish and explain to the audience today who were not in our briefing call what you think the impacts of civil society are, specifically in Africa. Please do talk to that. But also, what can we as civil society do to try and be proactive about this increase in disinformation coming in via AI?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. I think certainly, yes, marginalized groups certainly are going to be affected, obviously, especially people, especially in Africa here, where especially people that expressively identify themselves as gays and lesbians. Generally, they are not given enough space to articulate and to come out, especially in our ecosystem. And obviously, if they try and come out, obviously, oftentimes they are met with a lot of threats on their lives and things like that. So certainly, as AI is going to be increasingly being used for these kinds of things, there are chances that it can actually be abused by other people to try and spread malicious messages around even banning and killing some of these people in our communities, because oftentimes that's what we have seen, especially in townships or in locations where people tend to accept that kind of a narrative that if somebody mobilizes around that kind of thing. But also even migrant communities, so for example, in spaces where xenophobia is a big issue, again, a micro-targeting of if you use AI to micro-target and talk about these kinds of narratives, you can also push people to actually go for xenophobic attacks, kill foreigners and things like that. That can easily also happen because we've seen it happen before there was AI in use as it is right now. So it's very possible that we are likely to see that happening going into the future. So in that kind of ecosystem, I would say that civil society therefore has got a role to play. They need to make sure that they capacitate our communities in terms of sensitizing them around what to expect as we move into this uncharted territory. They need to make sure that they increase a lot of media literacy campaigns, digital literacy campaigns, so that people can understand how to fact check, but to know how AI generated content comes in what form does it come, how is it framed, these kinds of things. So it's very, very important that we capacitate our communities so that they understand where we are going with this kind of technology, because most of us certainly we don't have that kind of literacy that Liz was talking about, and because they don't have that kind of literacy, they are easily vulnerable to these kinds of campaigns if they are really targeted. And the messages, usually the fear that I have is whereby AI is actually used to generate misinformation that has got an emotional appeal. And I think once you use an emotional appeal, Africa is such a diverse continent, so you can easily cause a genocide. Mobilize along ethnicity, mobilize along religion, mobilize along nationality lines, identity politics, and all these kinds of things. So it's very easy that you can easily torch an inferno if you can actually do use AI for an emotionally appealing kind of a narrative that can actually then mobilize people and create havoc in society. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you. There was a lot of chat about the $400 to build an AI disinformation tool. That seemed to cause a lot of interest. And I was wondering, there is this low barrier to entry now. AI has kind of opened things up for these disinformation and for bad actors. To flip that question, does this give us an opportunity? Are there elements of us to tackle dis and malinformation through this new technology which has a low barrier to entry? Liz, I was wondering if you had any experiences or you could give any examples of what you're seeing in your work, and Admire as well, please add in how you're seeing AI for good coming through in Africa. And then I'd also, after that, I'd like to turn to Henry and ask from him how they're tackling the solution and what latest developments in the kind of tech side of software. But if I could first pose the question to you, Liz, of if we're thinking it's a low barrier to entry, are there any solutions that we're seeing? Are there any small little startups or open source projects coming through that are using this technology to try and tackle all of this onslaught of disinformation? And I'd be really keen to hear any examples you have from your research. Thank you.
Yeah, so there are lots of startups in Africa that have started tackling the problem of disinformation. The problem of disinformation and AI is kind of expanded to also the problem of deploying AI in Africa itself. Because the use of AI by civil society, we are seeing some that are fighting disinformation through the same patterns through which disinformation is spread, they're also using the same patterns to spread correct information to the society. And those are very good examples by fact checkers, where they source the correct information and use the same tactics to spread that as well, so that it also reaches to the same way, that it also, the same kind of speed and the same kind of wide reach that it also reaches. We've seen also startups also collecting data, crowdsourcing data, like the way Ushahidi does, for correct sources of information on the ground. There's a risk to this also, because there are people who actually masquerade as good sources of information to provide bad information to this system. So there are risks as well as opportunities also with the use of this. I'll speak about one challenge that most of these civil society startups face when it comes to the tackling disinformation. AI needs data, feeding of data, and data is something that is quite lacking in Africa. One, in terms of generation, and in terms of quality data, and also in terms of diversity when it comes to taking that data. Because I wouldn't say that quality of data is not good, but because of the diverse language, some of this content is not being picked by the existing AI tools that are there. And that is the challenge that some of these local startups are trying to do. It takes a lot of resources, again, because you have to translate this data, you have to clean up this data into a way that can actually be used for machine learning and all that. And also even tackling it as well, because the output also needs to be the same, speaking to the same people with the same ethnic language, the same cultural context as well. It's a lot of work there. The other thing is that the challenge that we are seeing right now with disinformation is that there's a lot of citizen journalism, a lot of disinformation also coming from the citizens themselves. But when you're looking at institutions with authority, especially government institutions that are actually mandated to run the election, or judicial institution, they are not proactive in giving this information. And this poses a challenge to fact checkers as well, because you have disinformation online, but there's no way of dispelling this disinformation, because the main sources themselves are not producing information proactively, and even getting them to give you information. There's some sort of bureaucracy there. So that speaks to implementation of right to access to information, and how even these institutions implement it, or even how they understand right to access to information, or how they are responsible to produce proactive information. This challenge is mostly felt during heightened seasons, especially during election, where people give their own sets of results from the ground, and when it hasn't been pronounced by the election body, or there's some sort of disinformation about voter manipulation somewhere, but this hasn't been given out from the elections body. And there's some slowness with the media in giving this information, because the media is so curbed with regulation, in a way that if it just spreads one information that is not correct, when it reports that, the truth that is going to come is going to even destabilize the whole media organization itself. So they are quite careful, and that's why they are being used as credible sources of information. But the information comes later, in a way that they can't fight some of these pieces of disinformation as they occur. And yet the challenge is that when disinformation spreads, it takes like 1 hour to trigger an action from a society, but it takes like even days to verify some certain kind of disinformation. I'm digressing to your question right now. Apologies.
No, it's fascinating. Thank you. I know we're very short of time, so I'm going to quickly pass to Henry if he would like to speak very quickly on any latest developments in technology that he feels would be a good solution to this problem on a kind of broader programming level.
Sure. I'm really pleased to see my friend Glenn Tarman in the chat. Talk quite a lot about the work that our colleagues at Full Fact are doing with this. I mean, we do use AI in the context of fact-checking. We use it to triage and allow our fact-checking team to identify narratives more efficiently and easily and conduct their fact checks more quickly. So I definitely see a role, and we are using it in exactly the same way they are, to help fact checkers do more work to actually debunk some of the mis and disinformation that's out there. And like them, we publish every single fact check we're able to do for anybody to see. And that is also used by social media platforms to show people when they should be more skeptical of the claims that are circulating on platforms. And you'll see those advisories come up. Those are actually powered by people like us and Full Fact, who actually work directly for the social media platforms. And AI has a role in helping us do that. I mean, I think it's quite interesting as a startup to also say that we started out as a consumer startup. So we actually built a browser extension, which we built AI into, that you could add onto Google Chrome, and you could be looking at a page, and you could click on the extension, and it would the model that we still use in different contexts would actually look at the credibility of the sources of the information that was on that page and give you an assessment as to how credible what you're reading and the sources for it were likely to be. It was interesting that nobody was prepared to pay for that. They very much liked it, but the idea that that might be a value-added service that a company might be able to sell and grow with, and actually, I guess, sell the idea of being an antidote to what you might be reading, wasn't something we could commercialize. So we had to commercialize in a completely different way, which is how I'll finish with where I think the potential is. What we are trying to do is use AI to tackle at, I guess, the systemic level, the problem of how you understand when a disinformation campaign is in action. So we've identified 8 different types of behaviors, and we published technical papers on this if you're interested in reading them, that set out exactly how you can use AI to look around for the common tactics, a number of which have been used on this call, actually, that will be used by a bad actor to spread disinformation, and look at how you can build a composite picture of that and actually map it on a scale across a social media network of a campaign playing out real time that may actually be a disinformation campaign happening. So we like to think, a classic example of how this technology, as I said in my own opening pitch, is both a threat and an opportunity for solving the disinformation problem. And I think we have to be talking about what the opportunities are, because there are multiples there to how you address that, whether that's through indirectly supporting social media platforms to do their jobs as they should be doing, whether it's supporting governments to understand the threats that they're facing from those that would try to interfere with an election or try to interfere with civic society, or whether it's an NGO who maybe doesn't have to rely on investors, that wants to try and build the same consumer app that we tried to make work. I think that's certainly possible if there's an NGO there that wants to become a tech NGO. And I'll leave it at that.
Wonderful, thank you. We had a couple of questions, and just if I could take the liberty, it was essentially, top tips for NGOs as civil society organisations. What can we do? Admire, I know you spoke about digital literacy, and in our talk previously, you had some wonderful points around actually as civil society, we can advocate, we can influence, we can do that on a level with local, international, we can use our voice to support those marginalised groups. So sorry to paraphrase you, Admire, it was wonderful speaking, and I recommend anybody to go to the resources from Liz and Admire, and obviously logically, but I'm very mindful of time. And just to paraphrase what I heard from these wonderful experts previously, is that there is stuff we as civil society organisations can do, and we shouldn't be afraid to raise our voices on this important issue. So that leaves me with a big thank you to everybody. I would like to thank so much our impressive speakers for your thoughtful contributions. Thank you to the international sign interpreters and the captioners for their wonderful work. Finally, thank you to you, our audience, for coming today and for your great questions.